the consensus that I believe was shared 100% in the room is that we all go away and we all think about what we've heard.
Including the Prime Minister?
Including the Prime Minister, absolutely, absolutely. There's no, there's been talk of a deadline. There's no deadline here. What there is, though, obviously, is the clock that is ticking toward another election.
So what does happen now? That certainly is the big question. Here to help me answer it is our front bench. With me this evening, Saeed Salvan. He's the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Jamie Ellerton is a Conservative strategist and founding partner of Canaptus Limited. Here at the House, outside, I should say, just outside the House of Commons, next to me, former interim NDP National Director Carl Bélanger. He's now the President of Traction Strategies. And squeezed right next to him is Marika Walsh, a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Good to see you. Marika, I'll start with you. And that million-dollar question. What do you think does happen next?
I think the honest answer is that they don't know and we don't know. I really do. I mean, even Mark Miller, who is one of the Prime Minister's staunchest allies in cabinet in the Liberal Party, one of his closest friends, said in scrums to us afterwards, there's still some things to be sorted out. So he's saying that even as he says the Prime Minister is staying, he wants to stay on. And that seems to be the message, but it's unclear how that squares with what he heard behind those closed doors. My understanding is that he spoke at the beginning of caucus and the end of caucus. And at the beginning of caucus, it was much of what they've heard before. And at the end of caucus, it was more about saying he heard them. It was hard to hear it, but he believes he's the right person. So when he says he's going to reflect, but also believes he's the right person, it's hard to see how that all squares and how they actually do unite behind their leader, because nobody was very clearly saying that today. Yeah. Or at least not as resoundingly clear as they were saying they were united against Pierre Poilievre.
I thought the fact, Carl, that is clearly the talking point they were given, and that they all delivered, those who willingly spoke to reporters publicly, was that we're united against Pierre Poilievre. Understandably, okay. But they weren't all saying that they are united behind the Prime Minister. And to Marika's point, I mean, he promised at the end to reflect on what they had brought forward to him. And if you have more than 24 MPs say they want you to leave, like, where does that leave you?
Well, I mean, it was 2,000 MPs, about, 15% of caucus. That was a good day under Jean Chrétien. So it's a matter of how do you handle it, right? And the thing is...
I don't think it went very well for Jean Chrétien.
Well, he lasted, I mean, he was there for a long time. The thing is, when the ship is sinking, you have two different reactions. You have the people who jump off the ship and they run away, they get away. We've seen a few of those so far, there will be more. Then you have those who feel that they're drowning. And when you're drowning, what do? Well, you panic, you want to throw the captain overboard, you flip the lifeboat and you grab onto anything or anyone and you bring them down with you. That's what happened today. This was not productive. It won't achieve anything. It's a lose-lose proposition, and there's no way out in the short term unless Justin Trudeau decides that he's gone. And even if he's gone, I don't see a savior. There's no savior, and there's no force, no real force behind it. That's why these MPs mostly are still anonymous.
Do you think that they... Jamie felt like they, and I take Carl's point, I get how in the long run, I don't know how productive this ends up being for the party, but my sense is they didn't feel like they had other options, basically.
Yeah, I think if you translate the Prime Minister's talking points from talking point English to actual English, he effectively said, my leadership lives to see another day. These struggles are going to continue. And so I think when you look at what's gone on here, this is now going on month 3 of this kind of feeling like it's at a fever pitch. The government isn't able to get a message out about anything else. They're not debating any policy. They're not even throwing attacks at the Conservatives or any of the opposition parties. They're always just talking about themselves. And that in and of itself is going to even further the Liberal Party negatives and further the negatives on the Prime Minister, because he's not actually delivering in an environment where everyone is already frustrated. I think anything short of an actual short, quick succession playbook where he's able to say, here's what we're going to do, here's our best shot, and he actually gets buy-in from caucus, this is just going to continue to kind of trickle along, suck up all the oxygen in Ottawa, and ultimately tell Canadians that this government is done.
Yeah, I think Jamie circles me back to like the question I keep thinking about, Saeed, which is like, where does this go? So, for example, if the Prime Minister a week from now does tell MPs, you know what, I'm doubling down, I really do believe that I'm still the right person, like your choice if you stay and go, or 24 of them going to decide not to seek re-election, or citizen dependence, like I don't know if they've followed it through that far in the thought process.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact is that this news is not just national, but it's now international news. The fact that there is dissent within the Prime Minister's own caucus, whether it's 20 or more, along with low polling numbers, does not do much to instill confidence in a potential future run. So that is going to be one of the biggest challenges. I think what's causing the delay is trying to figure out what's next. Even if there was to be another leader, how would they get picked? Who would that person be? When it comes to ridings, are the ridings ready? Is the fundraising where it should be? How is an election going to be run in this scenario? Now, you had a great guest on, Nick Nanos, right before us, who really talked about seeing polling numbers that essentially increased for the Liberals slightly when they heard that potentially there was some dissatisfaction around the Prime Minister and his position going to the next election. So that was interesting, and I think that may be something that they could take to heart going forward in the event that they do essentially try and find another leader.
I actually found it fascinating that Nick made that point, Marika, that essentially since the prospect of him leaving has become a realistic discussion, there's been a 6-point swing in his tracking for the Liberals. He was very clear to add the caveat. That doesn't mean the Liberals necessarily win. It also could change, obviously, when there is
and
a
it
successor.
has several times.
Yeah, but just the fact that even this discussion would punch through to a wider swath of the electorate is interesting.
It absolutely is interesting. And look, those polls are why Justin Trudeau is in a position that Stephen Harper was not. Stephen Harper had the same time horizon. He decided to lead the party into a fourth election despite history and sort of all the precedents saying you can't do it. But he had a way higher polling floor, and the Prime Minister doesn't have that. And that's why Caucus is so uneasy. But they also, the people defending Trudeau are not necessarily defending Trudeau because they love him, but because they are very concerned of a leadership race with the rules they have, limiting or making membership questions very challenging. It's essentially wide open right now. They're worried they could be essentially taken over as a party. And so there's lots of other factors to think about if you are going to pull that plug and push the leader overboard. And some people in caucus want to keep Mr. Trudeau there in part because of those things, not because he has so much support.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, just jumping off that, Carl, a number of them have said, like, one of the main points to kind of challenge the dissenters was, like, who is it? Like, what's your plan B to what you said, right?
Yeah.
And this is a unique scenario versus other times we've seen the leader of the Liberal Party pushed overboard, where there is usually somebody waiting in the wings and a coalescing around that person.
Yeah, and furthermore, we have a minority situation with a deadline that we hear from these MPs that is apparently October 28th, on the eve of the Bloc deadline, on their own demand to support the Bloc Québécois. So you're going to what, like prorogue, have a leadership race, then bring back a throne speech, and you think you will not go down the first occasion? It's not like the NDP is going to step up suddenly and give time to a new Liberal leader to, spread its wings. So it's not happening. No, I don't think it will happen. It will be a mistake to do that.
You think it'd be an election soon?
As soon, it would be short-lived, probably the shortest-lived Prime Minister in history.
Oh boy, well, get ready. Jamie, what do you think, just based on what Marika and Carl laid out, really will happen? Like, do you think ultimately the Prime Minister digs in, and then what happens to those MPs who have voiced their dissatisfaction?
Yeah, so I guess if we look at what I just laid out for what the Prime Minister's path forward is to kind of quell this, now let's look at what the dissidents' path forward is. They tried moral persuasion. They tried having a good faith argument. You can talk about political tactics, but this is Ottawa where people are going to talk and advance things in the public realm. That has now failed. So what do they actually do to force the Prime Minister's hands? They could go sit as independents. They could literally threaten his leadership by walking out. And I think it's also incumbent upon those who want the Prime Minister to go, if they want to succeed in their endeavor, to ultimately lay out what comes next, how this is going to be, and kind of create an air of what's possible, which in and of itself can appeal to democratic ideals and what this is going to be. Of course, the problem is there's no one who seems to really want to publicly be leading this charge, hence why you have a really awkward letter with Alfred Apps's name attached to it leaked today, and everyone kind of scratching their head wondering what's actually going on.
Yeah, it's a great point. Jamie's referencing this sort of separate campaign that is apparently coming from the Liberal grassroots, Saeed, that isn't the same thing, but does have a couple of names attached to it, though we don't know the full scope of it or the full number of people. That's all very confusing as well. To Jamie's point, though, what do the dissidents need to do, in your view? Because I think he's right. We need to know what's at stake from their perspective rather than just sort of rumor and speculation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, for those that support the Prime Minister, they're probably going to keep using the same talking points, which is talking about things like the $10 a day childcare and maybe a positive track record that he's had over sort of the past 9 years. But, those who are asking for him to step down, the big challenge is who are you going to put in place of him? So is that person going to be closely tied to the Prime Minister? Are they going to be another cabinet member? Or are they going to be essentially an outsider? And I think that's essentially where the Liberals would need to focus on, because you would need somebody who is not tied too closely to the Prime Minister in order to make a dent, to show that there is an actual sort of different direction that the party is taking going forward into a potential election.
My main question, is it going to be my front bench Thursday panelist, Christy Clark, and will she be on tomorrow night? Just kidding. Okay, I'll leave our discussion there. Thanks to this wonderful front bench. I appreciate it. Marika Walsh, Carl Bélanger, Saïd Salvam, and Jamie Allerton. We're back with our takeaway next.